Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast, Rexxfield Investigates, where we do exactly what we say. We investigate. Today, we have one of our investigators, Anna, on the podcast. So, Anna, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today we will be talking about a topic that's a pretty hot topic, and not to be confused with the awesome punk rock store hot topic,
Mm.
but we're trying to understand sextortion. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what sextortion is, what to look out for, how big of a problem it is, and just some of the psychology and some of the things that overlap with it. So, Anna, what is sextortion, and what are some of the things that they need to be on the lookout for?
Well, sextortion is one of the cases that's very passionate and dear to me, especially when it involves minors. In short, it's where someone will engage with their victim on social media, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, those kinds of things, or gaming platforms are very popular at the moment as well. And they will essentially trick them into sending a sexual photo or video. And then as soon as they have it, they will demand for more or for money and exploit the victims. So in generally, there are two types of sextortion scams. So the first one is more of a fast-paced, financially motivated sextortion, where everything happens very quickly within 30 to 60 minutes generally. They're often run by organized crime groups in originating from Africa or Asia. They have many victims at the same time, and usually they will demand money, often crypto or gift cards, and they particularly target adults and teenage boys. And then we also see cases where they target mainly teenagers, girls and boys, and these are more slower grooming based exploitation sextortion cases, and they develop over weeks or months, and they're more relationship focused, and there's a lot of manipulation happening, and the goal is to get more material. So often we see this in grooming cases involving pedophiles targeting minors rather than scammers who are out for money.
And that's especially heinous because for the two different types of groups, the damage to the person who's the victim is very hard because there's a lot of shame that goes along with it. There's second guessing themselves, and it completely shatters trust. So, in
Hmm.
the case where the scammers are doing that quick hit, if you will, where they're trying to target for that 30 or 60-minute time frame, they're very much trying to move fast. With Nigerian groups who are involved, many of the times we do see them directly targeting teens. And
Hmm.
with that, you nailed it. They're trying to get cryptocurrency, they're trying to get other things. You and I have spoken a good bit about the grooming for the longer term cases. And some of that grooming also happens on other platforms such as Roblox and other areas like that.
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit more on like what the psychology is behind it and kind of the urgency tactics that are played into what why somebody might be enticed to send that versus not send that?
Yeah, so with the faster financially driven sextortion scams, they very much play on the aspect of urgency. They make their victims panic, and in panic, you respond to threats much quicker without thinking. So they are quite successful in getting them to send more material or get them to send money. They will start nicely, and then within minutes, the conversation will change to a sexual component. And then as soon as they have their image or their video, the whole tone changes and they become very aggressive. And they'll basically say, we have this now. If you don't send me money, we'll send it to all your friends or all your family. Or if they're teenagers, they usually say, we'll send it to all your everyone at school. And they'll show screenshots of their followers on Facebook, and with the long term, with the more pedophile sextortion, they play very much on the manipulation. It's quite similar because as soon as the victim, they'll be nice, but as soon as the victim doesn't want to send anything anymore, they'll change their tone to the same tone, where they will send it to your family, your parents, your school. And Ronnie, you've been a teenager. If you're a teenager, your school is your life. So the thought of those pictures being distributed at school is terrifying. It's why we see so many suicides amongst minors when it comes to these types of cases, and it's mainly teenage boys. And in almost all of the suicide cases of the teenage boys, they're related to the more financially driven scams, and I think that's because of the level of urgency and panic that is involved with those types of scams.
And to kind of walk through some of that and just kind of reflecting back on the nervous system and how the nervous system responds to threats like that. When you're in a situation and you're scared, your nervous system will react and it actually goes into the fight or flight response.
Hmm.
And specifically, when it goes in that fight or flight response, it's trying to run away or go and fight this thing. And a lot of the reason it reacts is because back when we used to hunt lions and other things, if you had like a big bear coming at you, you get scared and go and try and get away. When that fear is triggered in us and when that nervous system activates, our prefrontal cortex, or the front part of our head that's responsible for that logical thinking, actually turns off.
Mm.
And because of that, deactivation, it's harder to actually work with a victim and be able to have that communication. So when they're being threatened with, hey, I'm going to send this to all your friends, that is actually considered a life or death thing to that teen. And the reason is that if something like that happens, or like I'm going to be thrown at my friend group, they're going to think differently of me and they're not going to want to hang out with me.
Yeah.
And that similar concept happened when humans were tribal people. Like if we were thrown out of a tribe, that tribe was responsible for your food, it was responsible for everything you were doing. So being thrown out of that group is a very deep rooted core belief in us. And it's only once you later grow, later develop, that you understand the inner workings. Now, specific with the grooming, this is a much different phase. And we see a lot of this happening with romance scam victims as well.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
yep. So, for a lot of the grooming phases, the way that this works is because it's a slower burn, you're not having that same trigger and that same reaction in a person. So, with that, if you're able to kind of take it and tell the story little bit by little bit by little bit, you're not having that emotional reaction, if you will. And
Yeah.
because of that, you're able to manipulate and pull somebody into doing other things. So that's the cases where we see scam victims who are sending money to their scammers, or receiving money, if you will. And likewise, it's where we see children who are groomed to go and do a lot of these other things. And there's a lot of horrible groups out there right now who are involved in different elements of grooming.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the scams that move very quickly, it's that level of panic that gets people to act upon them. Whereas with, pedophiles and minor cases, they usually get some time to breathe in between. The demands are less urgent. They'll get a day or two in between, whereas the other ones, they have to act instantly. And that level of urgency and panic, especially teenage boys, don't see any other way out than leave the world, so to speak.
Absolutely, and because of that, that fight or flight response in the body, it's very uncomfortable. And for a lot of teens who are put into that situation, it's physically discomforting. Like it's physically uncomfortable to actually be in your body, if you will. For emotional intelligence, learning that an emotion is something that's temporary and it's not a purely defined moment is something that you learn as you grow. But when you're in that tight spot, when you're in that tight stress, that doesn't feel like it's going to go away. It feels like that's a permanent thing. And I agree with you. Is I feel like that's a lot of the reason that we see a lot of teen suicide playing into that, because again, they're trying to get away from that physical discomfort, and the only way they know how to alleviate that discomfort is to take their lives. And
Yeah.
that's one of the unfortunate things, that we're seeing a lot of teen suicides as directly as a result of that.
Yeah, and like you mentioned before as well, because of the little time that they are given, they don't have time to confide it in anyone. And I think especially maybe teenage boys more than teenage girls deal with the level of shame that comes with it. If we get sextortion case with minors, it is because the teenager has told one of their parents, and the parents are usually the ones that engage us. But yeah, I think with the cases that unfortunately resulted in suicide, those parents often didn't even know that this was happening.
Yeah, and I know on the last podcast you and I have recorded, we mentioned that when it comes to a lot of teen boys who are learning how to process through their emotions, they don't necessarily have that language to do that. Whereas a lot of teen girls are a lot more free to express that.
Hmm.
And I know I'll echo what I did on that last episode, is that it's very much the case where learning to work through your emotions is not an easy thing. Have shame or a lot of sticky emotions are very uncomfortable in the body. Like, yeah, a lot of teens don't know how to process through that. Hell, a lot of adults don't know how to process
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah.
And it's only once you start working with that and learning how to actually move through that you're able to kind of make that headway. With so kind of moving along, like, are there any case studies that you have where you've been able to kind of understand like some of the timelines and kind of the real world impact?
We had a father reach out about his 15-year-old daughter. She met someone on TikTok. They eventually went to Snapchat. They talked for some weeks. He used a profile with a nice looking boy with the same age, and they bonded quite quickly. Eventually, she sent a photo after he sent a video of himself. And it just went back and forth a little bit until she talked to him less and less. And then he got a little bit more aggressive with that he wanted her to send certain material. And she didn't. And then he left her alone for almost 2 years. Then he came back and reached out on eventually Instagram. And it was the same person, same control, and he used what he already had. And he basically said, if you don't send more, I'll send them to your friends in high school, etc. And because she didn't want that and she was trying to protect herself, she sent more images. But it didn't matter. He eventually did send some photos to people that she knew, some of her classmates and friends. And at that point, she confided in her father in a panic, and her father engaged law enforcement and eventually asked us to help because law enforcement didn't really know what to do with the case. So we took on this case to identify the anonymous Instagram user who was torturing her essentially. And we used what we call a controlled engagement. It's a social engineering, and we had her post a private Instagram story that was only visible to him. And we instructed her on what to post, and we gave her some of what we call our secret juice that allows us to track him if he views the story and if he takes the bait of what we put in place. And he used a VPN. He was trying to hide his tracks, but he revisited with his real IP address, which led back to Germany. And later, I used an Instagram account of her best friend. Her best friend was also in contact with him, and I engaged in a conversation with him over a period of time to win his trust. And eventually, I sent something that piqued his interest, and he took the bait again, and it led back to the same IP address in Germany, same device details, user agent details. And from there on, we could hand it over to the law enforcement, who could subpoena the German internet service provider, and that led back to the individual harassing her. And unfortunately, it was not a teenage boy, but it appeared to be a adult pedophile.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you were able to catch them and do that investigation and track back the IP address that was directly something that was seen by them. Because when it comes to a criminology perspective, your attackers will always come back and try and visit things, and if they're especially interested in a certain person, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to go back and revisit. While that turned back to be an adult who was sending that content, a lot of the times for many of these groups, they will use stolen pictures from other people pretending to be a teen on the internet just
Yeah.
to have them generate more pornography. When it comes to a lot of the threats and the way that the money is paid, do these scammers actually follow through with their threats, or what tends to happen?
It's hard to say the type of sextortion that is happening, because that will give me some type of indication of whether they will act upon it or not. So more often with the more financially motivated scams, the sextortion scams, they originate from, in most cases, African networks who deal with hundreds of victims at the same time. And generally, if a victim is not complying with their demands, they just move on to the next one, because they're talking to multiple victims at the same time. So in those cases, it's more rare that we actually see them following through with sending the material to loved ones of the victims. We have seen it, so I can't say that they don't, but it's less than the cases where we deal with pedophiles, because pedophile related sextortion cases are more emotions involved, because they have a longer relationship with the victim and they have less victims at the same time. They do have some sort of emotional connection with their victim in comparison with the African scams.
Mhm.
So in those cases, we do quite often see them sending it out, like the case study I mentioned earlier with the 15-year-old girl. He did send it to her classmates, and often they'll send it to the parents as well. It's hard to say, but depending on the type of scam, we can make a prediction, but you never know.
One of the biggest takeaway is if you have somebody doing that, your best thing is to just cut off all contact with them and talk to a parent. Because if you're cutting off the contact, that's going to be a higher likelihood that they'll be going off to another victim. When it comes to making those payments, you don't want to do that because you don't know if they're going to come back asking you for more or if it's going to escalate. So, your
Hmm.
best course of action is to not make the payment, block them, and just kind of go forward from there.
Yeah. As soon as you make that first payment, you're labeled
Hmm.
as someone who complies, and you'll be targeted even more. Um,
Absolutely. And
so yeah,
especially
like you said, the biggest chance of getting out is refusing that first payments.
and
Um,
especially with like a lot of the Nigerian crimes that we see, when someone makes a payment or where a check is stolen, they will definitely continue doing that and keep going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And with those types of cases, usually that's the advice I give. If someone comes to Rexfield, just cut off all contact, don't respond to their demands. And I usually advise them not to spend any money on our services, because law enforcement won't help in most cases. But with minors, it's more complicated, because they can't easily cut it off as easy as other victims can. If you've just been talking to someone for an hour, it's a very different situation than if you've been talking to someone for months. And because those bad actors are a lot more likely to retaliate if you do cut it off instantly.
People need to know that this is a very widespread thing and it's growing.
Mm.
And for a lot of the victims who are seeing this, it's like you're not alone in this. We see a lot of people across the board who is targeted. Again, while there is a lot of teens who are being targeted with this happens to adults too. And like I know I've talked with some victims who are well in their 30s who've gotten targeted with this too.
I can only imagine how stressful it is, regardless of what age you are. The thought of you've done something, you've sent out a photo, and then all of a sudden your whole personal network may see that photo. It's quite embarrassing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and
I can imagine how the victims feel.
yeah, and it's also important to try and get ahead of it too. Is like if you're trying to work with your family, just be like, hey, this might be happening, and it's very hard. And yeah, I couldn't imagine being in that situation either. So,
Yeah,
regardless of how it goes, it's very difficult.
yeah, and like you said, it's a growing problem, and it'll only grow more and more,
Hmm.
especially with deep fake, which we touched on in our previous podcast briefly as well. But it takes away the whole, where before you could teach your kids to never send any photos, but that's not no longer the case, because anyone can become a victim. Even if
Exactly.
you're not sharing any photos, they can just Photoshop it with deepfake, and it looks real. You can't detect it's
Hmm.
fake. And I found some statistics that but just between 2021 and 23, reports of sextortion increased by 300 over 300%, and that's people who are actually reporting this. So I imagine that more people don't report it than that they do. And then since 2021, there have been at least 36 teenage boys who died by suicide, and that number will also only grow.
Way too young, way too young.
Absolutely. So this is a very important problem to talk more about and teach children more about, and for law enforcement also to act upon more than they currently do. One second, I need to wake up my dog because he's snoring.
Maybe I'm gonna leave the snoring dog part in there. So
Oh my goodness. But yeah, it's a very important problem that we have, and that's only going to
mhm,
grow more and more. And children are involved, so I'm very passionate about speaking out about this more, and I'm glad to see it's getting more coverage in the media as well.
absolutely, yeah, because it's a especially heinous crime that yeah, kids should not be targeted with that stuff.
No, absolutely.
All right, so go ahead and to close this up for the snoring dog. Because I know it's late here, and I'm ready. I'm sitting here yawning too. I'm tired as well. So, for closing remarks, anything you want to close up or tea for the next sextortion episode?
Well, next episode we'll dive more into what parents can do, because like we said before, a big problem amongst the minors dealing with sextortion is that they don't confide in their parents. So yeah, let's talk next episode more about what parents can do to open the conversation, and to what to look out for, and what to teach their children on what to look out for as well.
All right, awesome. Sounds good. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap this episode up. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe, whatever the other YouTube, TikTokers, Instahoozy, Whatsits, and whatever's telling you to do. And we will see you next time. Rexxfield Investigates out. Take care, y'all.
Bye bye.